He sits there in awe as his father crawls from the grave hearing the words. He quickly gets up, running away from the nightmare he had somehow made. He wanted to think of what outcomes could have led to this, but all he was thinking about was where the hell he could go. He quickly runs to the nearest house and starts banging on the door, crying out,
"Please, let me in! There's a fucking corpse out here trying to kill me!"
He turns around looking for the phantasm roaming the streets. Slowly, he sees over the roads the floating visage of his dead father, reaching out his hand. A turn of its neck and a bone-chilling snap is heard, then a weird clicking noise coming from its mouth. Jedediah can only think of the ways it will tear him apart. In seconds it floats towards him in insane speed. Hearing maniacal laughing, he screams, turning around, pounding on the door, begging to be let in. 2 seconds later, light flashes his face and a tall dark figure pushes him out of the way and strikes at the beast with an axe. Green slime going all over the place after the thing was dead. The man turned around with him shouting at Jedediah,
"Are you stupid or something, kid?"
The face, Jedediah recognized it. Rod Lane. His face showed confusion as a woman's voice speaks up.
"Just get him inside before he wakes up more of those things."
Rod pulls him up but his shirt and pushes him inside, slamming and locking the door behind them. Jedediah gathers himself, seeing an older Tina Gray.
"But you were..."
He whispers as Rod steps in front of the young man and asks,
"I'm gonna ask you once, what the hell were you doing out there? The town has rules for a reason, most important one, and the simplest to follow: don't go outside at night."
Jedediah just stands there dumbfounded, looking around, seeing in the other room 2 other people, a man and a woman. They both step up and the woman holds out her hand and says,
"I'm Nancy Thompson."
He looks up, remembering her stories. He was told she killed herself, so how did making Freddy not turn into a nightmare killer undo that? He turns to the man who looks an awful lot like Johnny Depp, answers his name.
"I'm Glenn Lance."
Jedediah just goes to sit down, stating,
"I don't understand what's going on here."
He holds his head and says,
"Where did I fuck up?"
Rod looks confused and answers,
"Going outside at night?"
Tina slaps his shoulder. Jedediah just rubs his face and asks,
"Do you have a guest bedroom? I need rest."
Rod wants answers, but Tina stops him and says,
"Upstairs."
He nods, saying,
"Thank you."
He heads upstairs, spotting a room labeled for guests, and enters in it, shutting the door, and says,
"I just need to go back to sleep and see where it went wrong."
He flops on the bed, shutting his eyes, and drifts off to sleep. He opens his eyes, but he's not in the timeline. He's in collage of some sorts: lockers, rotted dorms, emptied papers everywhere. He could hear humming them the song he heard last time he dreamt played. Louder than before over the speakers, he heard the scraping of claws. He turned around, see shiny silver knives pulling back into the darkness.
"No, I ended you!"
He shouts. He turns around, seeing a cloaked figure hold out a leather glove with silver knives and knuckles rather than the carotid knives and bronze knuckles. Then they slash, and he wakes up. Before he could question why he wasn't allowed into the timeline hall, he reaches for his chest, feeling blood. He takes off his shirt, seeing a knot deep enough to kill, but sharp enough to leave a mark. Cut 4 claw marks, the same as his mother's. Kruger was back, and he had to know how to fix this. His sister said she had time-traveled herself, only she would be able to undo this mess. He goes downstairs with Tina laying a plate of eggs on the table for her boyfriend and friends. They look over to see him bandaging his wound. Jedediah, when he's done, puts his sweatshirt on. Nancy asks,
"What happened? Did the Deadite cut you?"
Jedediah doesn't know if this timeline is similar to believing him on time travel or if they lock up kids for having dream demons. He decides to just say,
"Yeah, It's not deep. Listen, thank you for saving me last night. I'll not do that again. I have to get back to my sister.
And he leaves the house, leaving them all confused. Jedediah arrives back home. He opens the door, seeing Loretta cooking. He enters, seeing her turn to him, and says,
Hi, Frederick.
Jedediah doesn't even bother correcting her and asks,
Do you even remember what happened last night?
She thinks and says,
I found a notebook that says read later. Why?
Jedediah looks her dead in the eye and says,
You time traveled to try to save Dad. How did he die?
Loretta looks confused and asks,
How did you know that?
You told me last night. I've done it too, but I was trying to save Mom. After my last attempt, I ended up here. Do you have someone who helped you learn how far your dream power goes?
She looks confused and says,
No. I just kept reliving the same moment ever since his death. I changed minor things, but every time the killer came with a glove with knives for fingers.
Jedediah rubs his head and says in stress,
Read the book.
She opens the book and schemes to a later point.
Vicky is telling me reality is being distorted beyond proportions.
Jedediah looks up and says,
Did you meet this Vicky before your memory became an issue?
Loretta thinks and says,
I've got nothing. It says here they worked at Weston Hills Mental Hospital.
Jedediah nods and says,
Well, let's go. I have to figure out where the timeline got fucked.
She closes the notebook and says,
Wait, what? Where are you going?
They leave the house, heading to Weston Hills. They arrive, seeing the building mostly decrepit and unkept. Jedediah wonders if there might be hypnosil inside, and as they go and he can see this building should be at demolishing point, and says,
Looks like this hasn't been a functional hospital in over 37 years.
He then spots a nun walking up the stairs well and shouts,
Hello there? Can you help us?
Loretta looks concerned and says,
Freddy, who are you talking to?
He just chases the woman up the stairs, try to be as quick as possible. He sees he turn into a door. He runs over to see it shut.
Maybe it opens inwards.
He whispers. Loretta catches up, asking,
What are you doing?
The door opens inward. Jedediah sees the faces, recognizing it, but blonde hair and wearing a lab coat.
Malcolm?
He says the person looks confused and asks Loretta,
Do you keep your book locked up at night? No, I wake up with it in my arms, but I'm a light sleeper, so he couldn't have gotten it. Also, I'm assuming you're Vicky?
Yes, but we've known each other for 2 years, so I trusted you with my secret. How did you know about it?
Jedediah says,
Because we're coworkers. That's the name you introduced yourself with. Wait, your original name was Vicky?
He looks down, seeing he's holding something he's seeing before. He looks back up and says,
I didn't know you were a fan. You said that they sucked.
Pardon?
That's a PKE meter.
He holds it up and says,
I've invented this months ago. It detects...
Psychokinetic energy.
Malcolm looks confused and says,
Yes. Where have you seen this before?
Jedediah looks concerned.
Ghostbusters? The 1984 movie?
Malcolm and Loretta look at him confused as he says,
It had a sequel, a cartoon series, several video games, toys. Heck, they even came out with one 2 years ago.
Malcolm then asks,
What year do you think this is, might I ask?
July 2nd? No, 6th, 2023.
Loretta just assumes he's right, as she can't remember what day it is. Malcolm's response is cold like a dagger when he responds,
Try February 28th, 2024.
Jedediah looks shocked and Malcolm continues saying,
Loretta has been coming to me with some time travel questions. I suppose you know my chosen name. We've met.
Jedediah nods slowly. Malcolm. He nods his head to the right, signaling then to come, and Jedediah shuts the door behind him, seeing papers everywhere, some about a new killer at Crystal Lake. People taking pictures of some winged demon. A massive slaughter in New York, a U.S. ambassador trying to kill his own son, a virus ravaging the planet, corpses rising from the grave. And the last one he spots piques his interest the most. Teens around Springwood going missing as well. His mother, a shot of her smiling, named Catherine Kruger, reported missing as well. He crumples it up and throws it to the ground, Loretta noticing it and responds.
What was she like?
He looks at her as she continues.
From your timeline.
He sighs and says,
Kindest person you would know. She helped kids overcome traumas. My Aunt Tracy got a job in metalworks. Before that, everyone saw her as a pathetic lump of muscle. She helped kids overcome neighborhood challenges. Heck, she was one trying to stop the Weston Hills constantly locking kids away for seemingly no reason. But now I know why they did it.
Loretta then asks,
How did she die?
He goes pale and his lips quiver as Loretta then tries to stare.
I told you what happened to Dad here. I want to know what happened to Mom there.
He sighs and decides to tell her a half-truth.
Her car crashed. We were all heartbroken by it.
Malcolm interrupts and brings out a sheet of paper and states,
Certain things have happened in our past that make no sense, like things were planted in our layer of reality from others.
Jedediah, confused, asks.
What do you mean?
Malcolm draws a line.
Imagine this line is time you go back and change a part of the past that branches into a new future.
Yeah, fulcrum point in time, morphin-inject field, swapping timelines, fixed events. I've been down that road.
Good.
He crumples up the paper, throws it aside, and begins to write on the one under it. And says,
Have you ever heard of the recursive stack?
Jedediah thinks on it and says,
Nope.
Malcolm draws 3 lines and says,
Dr. Robert Scranton wrote an article on this. The theory goes there are different layers of reality, like say your Ghostbusters. To you it was fiction, but if you went into it, it would be just as real as you or I speaking to each other. But now let's go a step further and say in that reality, think of something, anything.
He-Man?
Okay, so He-Man is fiction to them, but you go further, the same applies. No reality is fake or real. The theory goes we aren't even at the top. There are ones above us that are either reading or watching us right now.
Jedediah gets cold feet. Loretta gets intrigued. Jedediah spots this and notices she's not paying much attention, except on Malcolm. He rolls his eyes and says,
Okay, all well and good, but how does that explain anything about what's happening?
Malcolm points at Jedediah and says,
You, Frederick, are the thing that makes this all make sense. You see, the theory goes you reach the top of the stack. You control everything, the problem being it's infinite, so eventually what's below you is just as effective as what's above.
He draws the going back in timeline, then making the line start to curve and swerve, and looks back up, saying,
It goes both ways.
Jedediah respond.
I still don't follow.
Malcolm then states,
All right, think of movie or show or a game you saw which led to anything happening where you are from. Like say someone watches The Great Outdoors and that leads to them starting a family, or something scary makes people think it's real and kill other people. Or a serious drama about war makes a person become anti-war. If those movies hadn't happened or not the way they did, it's possible the outcome would be different. Now you did something big like the butterfly effect, but big enough to send waves of tachyon energy to these other layers, and they bounced energy back. Eventually everyone gets tangled and the massive waves of energy keep getting stronger and stronger till eventually.
He stops show lines and taglin into each other. Jedediah asks,
Eventually what?
Malcolm looks up with a hint of fear and looks back down, drawing a spiral all over the lines. Then he crumples up the paper and says,
Until one of the stacks must go, the one that caused the vibrations. The others are severed and restored, but the layer that pushed the button must be removed.
Jedediah stands there and thinks about the hall, the end with the lifeless dark circle. He states,
I saw the end of the world in that hall.
He looks back and says,
So me saving my mom did this.
Malcolm shakes his head and says,
No, that's too small. For this situation anyway big for you, but not to do this. It had to have been something else.
Jedediah turns to Loretta and grabs her out of her trance and says,
You have to go back and see what happened that led to this.
She stumbles and says,
I don't know how. I only know that when I sleep, I would repeat the same dream over and over.
Malcolm then grabs Jedediah's arm and says,
That wouldn't do much anyways. By this point, time travel isn't the answer. We need to piece this out in the now and figure out how to stop it.
Jedediah then sighs and says,
Wait.
He reaches in his pocket and pulls out the card that Ash Williams had given him showing Smart Michigan. Jedediah says,
This man is probably our best and only bet. He talked about some ancient book, the Necronomicon Ex Mortis.
Malcolm nods and says,
There's one problem with that. We have to travel there.
Sure, the nighttime would be dangerous, but daytime seems to repel the Deadites.
Deadites?
Deadites?
Malcolm and Loretta say in unison. Jedediah answers,
The dead bodies rising from the ground.
Malcolm then says,
There's also the Sentinels to worry about.
What's that?
Jedediah looks at him and says,
Silver balls sent to roam the planet depending on the class increases the likelihood of dying. The standard ones are about the size of your hand. They come with saws and drills. They mostly aim for you, hit shooting your brain matter on the floor. Big ones can shoot lasers and are a quarter of the size or the Eiffel Tower. The gold ones are smarter and seem to lead. The rest. Those ones are the most likely to die from.
Jedediah looks back down at the card and says,
Boy, I really fucked up the world.
Malcolm then finishes,
The best bet would be to have one of the armored gas trucks, but those are only used when you are sent on a gas run to our allies over at Crystal Lake to trade for some of our supplies they can't find as easily over there. And we would need to be given the keys, and even then I heard of a person who tried to steal one of the trucks. They were caught rather quickly and charged with treason and are currently in lockup at the police station.
Loretta chiming in,
We could take it while on the gas run once we're done pick.
Malcolm looks at her and says,
They would still notice unless it was raining massively or a sandstorm. When it happened, we would still be caught.
Jedediah looks at both of them and says,
Well, we have to try something. The world will literally end if we don't do something.
Malcolm sighs and answers,
We could volunteer, but the people picked would have to not want to be involved.
Jedediah turns to him and says,
Well then, that's the plan. When does the decision get made?
Malcolm says,
Tonight at 8. The trip is tomorrow at the crack of dawn.
Jedediah puts the paper back in his wallet and nods. He looks at Malcolm and say,
Where's the meeting?
Malcolm looks at him, knowing there's no talking him out of this look. Jedediah looks at the two and says to Malcolm,
You know the place.
City Hall.
He looks at Loretta and asks,
You know where it is?
Even now you're questioning my memory. Yes!
Alright. At around 8, we'll all meet back up at the City Hall. For now, I'll leave you two alone.
He leaves the two behind, heading back to the graveyard.